Welcome. Thank you for tuning in to this week's 3-2-1. That's 3 comments in 2 minutes with 1 insight. This week is Devarim, the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy. And Moses is sort of setting up his big last speech. The people are on the banks of the Jordan River. They're ready to go into the land. And he spends about 3 months giving them one last pep talk, if you will. And he spends a good chunk of time recounting the sin of the spies. That this is after the 40 years. He said, 38 years ago, you guys sent 12 spies and 10 of them came back and said, we can't win. And because of that, we didn't go in then. We had to wait these wandering years, these additional 38 years of wandering to don't forget that sin. And I learned something interesting, which is our tradition imagines that sin, the day the spies came back and said, we can't win, is said to be Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. And the second thing that it reminds me is that when we get to Tisha B'Av, our history has actually piled every terrible thing onto this day. It doesn't just commemorate the destruction of both temples. We imagine the Crusades started, the Inquisition began, every pogrom we think about on this day. We pile all of our terrible tragedy, and we are Jews. There's a lot of historical tragedy into this one day. These are when they began. This is the day when bad things happened to the Jewish people. And the third comment is, except usually the Holocaust. That after the Holocaust, there was a decision to make amongst the Jewish people, how do we commemorate this terrible thing? How do we never forget? And some said, we have Tisha B'Av, just add it to the list. And others said, no, it needs its own day. And that's where we get our insight this week, is I think that there is wisdom in both of these approaches. Not just the Jewish people, but really each of us, if we wanted to, could drown in our sorrows. I'm willing to bet that if, sometimes we say, how are you doing? Can't complain. What we really mean is, I'm not going to complain. I have lots of things to complain about, but I'm choosing not to. And so how do we manage? Because if we don't complain sometimes, if we don't focus on our sorrows, they just build up. And so one answer Judaism is giving us is the professional pity party, is that we take some time, we set time aside to make sure we remember that things are dark, broken, and bad. That we focus on those things, that we let ourselves feel those feelings of sadness and disconnection and brokenness. Sometimes we have acute trauma. We have something that is close to us and too much that it can't be joined in on those other days, and it needs its own time. The Holocaust is that for the Jewish people today. It is so big and so awful and so terrible that to put it next to anything is awful, is unacceptable. So it gets its own space. And that's our challenge for us. How we need to first differentiate between the many sorrows we all face, then the kind of trauma and sorrow that raises above and challenges us that needs its own time. And then for both of those, we need to set time in our cycles of lives to feel those pains. Not to say, but at least we have this, and not to say, well, I also have this, and here's the blessing, but to let ourselves just be sad and broken. Because then when we get to the joy, it doesn't feel forced, it doesn't feel fake. We can hold on to it with pride because we admitted, we faced the sorrow we all feel. I wish each of us the space for a pity party and the chance to celebrate right after. With that, I'll say Shabbat Shalom.